Before we go into the podcast, I want to just talk about a business that I've set up with my friend George. It is called the Podcast Introduction Group. So if you want to join and be able to be featured on 24 to 48 podcasts to be able to reach an amazing audience, this is the place you need to go to. Podcast, being a guest on podcasts, is automatically establishing you as an authority and is able to build your personal and professional brand. We handpick of a bank of podcasters that we have to be able to grow your business and brand. We do 100% of everything that needs to be done by my team. You do not need to lift a finger. You are able to expose yourself to new and relevant markets by going on other people's podcasts. You also are able to create brand loyalty. People will love listening to you and coming back to your products or services, and it's able to increase your revenue. So if you want to be able to get involved, you can sign up quickly, registered with an account manager. There's an onboarding call where we target the podcasts that you want to be on, the type that you want, whether it's entrepreneurship, business, health, fitness, whatever it is. We then match you to those podcasts and you can start your journey. We have regular catch-ups with our account managers, and Google ranks you when people search for you. So when people are searching for you, you're able to see your podcasts at the top of the list. So if you are interested in being a podcast guest on multiple podcasts, we are the place to go. If you go to podcastintroduction.com and go and register your details, we will have a quick call with you, match your podcast that you want to be on, and we can then start this process ASAP. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Back onto the podcast then. Just one last thing before we go into the podcast. I just wanted to talk to you about the fact that I have a YouTube channel that has been going for quite some time, and I am recording and releasing all of my interviews with some short videos as well on YouTube. So please do check it out. YouTube on Absolute Business Mindset. You'll see a bunch of interviews there, all the longer format interviews and some short videos as well. So please enjoy that. And here goes with the podcast interview. Today we have Mark Layder, who is a business strategist. Hello, Mark. How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you, Mark. Mark calling Mark, isn't it, today?
Yes. Thank you so much for joining me today. So we're going to go through your journey to success, your journey to where you are now, and we're going to go through the different areas that I cover in most of my podcasts. But as the podcast is called Absolute Business Mindset, the first question is for you is, what does a business mindset mean to you?
Over the years, Mark, I've come to realize that a business mindset, people think of it as like almost psychological, and clearly that's an influence. But for me, the business mindset now is the distinction between somebody having a good idea and getting into business doesn't necessarily make you into a business person. In fact, it often doesn't. And we see it, in both the US and the UK, with Dragon's Den in the UK and Shark Tank in the US, so that old pitching style of doing business, and that I've had this idea and then people are going to buy parts of your business. Often that person doesn't want to be or isn't a CEO type of person that's going to run a business. And that for me is what the business mindset's all about now, that there is a difference between being in business and being a business person, and that the people who are, listening and generally in business, they kind of need to work out very quickly. If they love making cakes, then that's what they're meant to be doing and getting the business to do the business. They don't want to end up being the business person. If they're the talent, they need to create a business that lets them be the talent, because it becomes very frustrating. It's the number one complaint people give us. So that's the business mindset of being clear on your role in the business and making sure that you set the business up, or as we call it, design the business to operate around the person who sets it up, around their strengths. Because if they don't do that, it's very tiring, it's very frustrating, and it's unproductive.
Thank you. That's a very detailed answer. Thank you very much. So let's talk about your upbringing. So I read when I was doing my research that you wanted to become a vet. So why did you, like, obviously a love of animals, but
Yeah.
why did you not go into veterinary service?
Because somewhere along the line, the penny drops that you're never going to be quite that academically either gifted or determined enough to study at the level that vets have to study at a level beyond medical doctors, because cats and dogs can't tell you what's wrong with them. At least we can. Yeah. So it was a love of animals and a Liverpool mother that would say to me, "You won't put them down. You won't do any of that." So she thought I would have been a very happy vet, just doing the good stuff. But it did give me something, though. It gave me a long-term goal. It meant that I knew I was going to university or college in some way, albeit the A levels in English terms, the subject you've got to study to get there, was gone to hell in a handbasket. I should have had better advice, because I was never going to get through that way, but it did give me a long-term goal.
Oh, fantastic. But so your degree was industrial psychology. What is industrial psychology?
Well, I think it changed, didn't it? If you go back, industrial kind of comes out of, it's psychology and work, isn't it? And then it got a bit sort of, in our terms, a bit more American, and it became organizational psychology. But it's kind of, when we were studying it, all the old Taylorism kind of work study things, and the world was an industrial place, but it pretty much means the psychology of work, doesn't it? And the whole, how people are different between work and home. And it was a degree that let me specialize from sort of social psychology and group dynamics more and more into the psychology of work. And it's probably I couldn't, as per the vet bit, I knew I couldn't study at that level if it wasn't a subject I wasn't interested in. And the beauty of psychology, other than you had to write exams, because you had to write exams, it was being able to make a case. It was being able to, quote different experiments or whatever it was to come up with kind of an argument on that basis. So psychology, when I was studying it, was a pretty new subject. It was a pretty much, witchcrafty subject stuff. But, we look how big it's got. But it was just, I'm very motivated by human behaviors. For me, the problem, even in the business world, it's not a skills shortage. It's about the way people are trained to think in relation to what they're doing. And so I've always had this interest. And so I was lucky enough to stumble into it in the late 70s.
That's fine. Don't worry. And so we're going to fast forward from your degree, but there's lots of different interesting aspects. So you started in sales. You then you were a regional manager in introducing finance and insurance to the UK motoring industry. These are areas we might come back to a little later on. But one of the bits that really fascinated me was that you were the #1 ticket seller for Tony Robbins. I think it was 1993.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And then you also brought E-Myth, Michael Gerber's book, one of my favourite books as well, to the UK. So how did you get into that area?
We'll be back after a quick break.
Hi, I'm Alex, the host of X Health Show. Meet the future of healthcare. Think X-Men, that's X Health. Actual superheroes behind programming living cells to cure cancer once and for all. Tech that detects preterm delivery in seconds, brain-computer interface, or apps that employ AI to match you, your disease, with the best treatment. X Health Show brings to you visionaries who push the boundaries of healthcare from Switzerland, the heart of Europe, and the most innovative country in the world. Let me introduce you to their startups. Head to X Health Show, meet the future of healthcare. Happy to greet you there.
The psychology, I guess, gave me an open mind to when I graduated. I think the main catalyst was discovering what were on those days, little cassettes, that became CDs, and now we download it all and the likes. But it was just an inquiring mind. And, I think the first set of tapes, as we called them, might well have been In Search of Excellence, the big business book at the time, Tom Peters. And then that took me further down the more personal development route. And, because I was playing with network marketing in the very early days, that was classed as pyramids days and all this stuff in the UK in the early 80s. But it was brilliant in that it was very quickly walking me into alternatives to just, quote, getting a job on that basis. So I was into what started to become personal development over many years. And then through a group in Italy, I was introduced to NLP. Before it was all badges, and certificates, in literally what would have been 1986.
Wow.
So quite intense work. So I think it was just my inquiring mind, and then speed up to early 90s. We'd bought a books and tapes company, and then that was a list that we had that were people that were salesy and interested in network marketing. So they were interested in stuff like Robbins. So that's where we hit up, and because we had lists and some good marketing people around us, we were the biggest ticket of the higher value 3-day event. We were the biggest sellers for Robbins. And then the E-Myth one, I read something in little magazine or whatever about this thing, the E-Myth, the entrepreneurial myth, and it was the first thing that introduced me to what I understood was kind of the failure of my parents, that had a grocer shop in Liverpool, and they survived for 20 years, so they did something right. But it was my mother's idea to kind of almost the immigrant model, where you've got a shop that you can live in and you can make an income from, and then the dads tend to go out to work to get you. So you've got safe income and speculative income, and you've got a shop. Well, it was the E-Myth that said working on the business, not working in the business. And I knew my mother had the mindset to expand and try and do clever things, but my dad was, more conservative, more kind of, well, we'll get by type thing. So she was the innovator, and it was her idea. And it really explained, that they hadn't gone into the shop to get one working and then take the profits for that to buy a second one, and then, have 10 shops and sell it off or whatever you do. And it was the E-Myth that explained that. So I then bumped into the book, of all places, in Sydney Airport, and the plane was delayed. And I'm not the world's fastest reader, but with a delayed plane and 24 hours on it as well, I read the whole book. And being, his thing is entrepreneur, manager, or technician. Typically, it's an entrepreneur that's going to call you and say, what you doing in England? And that's what happened. So I went over to San Francisco and took the second licensee, my best friend from college, with us. And the rest is history. And it was a terrific training. They're not my favorite company, but it was a terrific training and a terrific methodology in looking at business differently.
Absolutely. E-Myth is one of my favorite books. There's a couple. Traction is another one of is another favorite of mine.
There's Traction.
Yeah. It's so personal development's obviously been an important part of your life for some time. Who now currently who's in that space would you recommend to my listeners?
Well, some people don't like him, but I like GV, Gary Vaynerchuk. I like him because he's irreverent for a start. He's got a sense of humor, which sometimes isn't for the American palate, but the Brits, we don't mind a bit of swearing, and he's quite in your face, and I like his style on the almost, there isn't really a magic formula. Again, he's another sort of an immigrant, isn't he? That he's first generation born in the States, and I think his parents are Belarusian. And he had a start, didn't he? In that the family already had a wine business, but he's taken it such, dramatic expansion through it. And I like his sort of kick-ass, tell it like it is style. And I like the fact that he's, to this day, he can, within reason, still be sitting there at 3:00 in the morning on Twitter, that you have to put things in if you're going to get things out. And he's not selling the magic bullet or the magic pill. He's selling hard work with a bit of industry that ultimately good guys do finish rich. But he's kind of rock and roll about it. So he's one I like at the moment.
Yeah, I like Gary. He's one of those. I sort of picked him up maybe about 3 or 4 years ago, maybe even a little bit longer, and so consumed everything that he did, his books, and I kind of, and a lot of his videos as well. I must admit that there's been a distinct change for Gary Vaynerchuk from a sort of like grind, hustle, into a little bit more craft, that there's a bit more to it than just you have to work 18 hours, 20 hours a day. It's sort of like, now you've got to look after your employees and be a good person.
Well, that's his big thing at the moment, isn't it? That's his, in my early career, we were hired by big companies to, quote, motivate their staff. And it became a line that said, well, they were motivated when you hired them. And now they've been here 6 months and you want to motivate. Let me think. What's in common here? Because maybe it's you that needs to change rather than hire people, demotivate them, then pay to get them motivated. And it's still an age of, we listen to our son and his age generation, early 20s. And what we call sort of management training, some big companies that he's already worked with even as a sort of a kid. And the style of people talking to people in business is probably the most fundamental thing to know, that we're all in the people business. Yeah. We still fail really poorly on communication 101. It's still by far and away the biggest cause of the problem. And GV is seemingly that's his place to go for. His line with his father, I think, who would classically be a bit more old school maybe, was, why are you thinking your employees are going to think like you? Well, you're the owner. So, yeah, you can work 18 hours, but unless there's a real incentive, why would an employee do that? They've got a life, they've got a family, they want the money, they want to go home. And it's that kind of stuff. The world really needs to get into that and balance itself a little bit, because we're getting a bit too extreme on some of this stuff.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So when I was doing my research on you, that you've done 27 years in sports coaching. So what is the 3% of a winning edge? So this is a study and research that you've been doing within football, mainly football. So tell me a little bit about that. It sounds absolutely fascinating, because sports is the sort of cutting edge of competitiveness and sort of the winning mentality.
Yeah.
How's the study gone? How's the research going?
Well, again, I think it came out of, I'd love to try and do a sum of how many hours when you're an American Express district manager driving up and down the country, and then the motor, I think I did 65,000 miles one year. So I had plenty of time to listen to Psychology of Winning and Brian Tracy and blah, blah, blah. And, Zig Ziglar, that was the first one I ever came across, when I was really young. So there's a lot of that stuff in my head, sort of just in there. And the sports stuff, I guess, came from, I've grown up loving football, and Liverpool's a football city. And I was never going to be good enough to play at the highest level, but I could get on that bench somehow. I could get involved somehow. And I was doing actually, it was around the work we were doing, the Tony Robbins stuff, and an agent type that was doing work with actually Terry Venables, the football manager at the time, introduced me to a low-level football manager, and sort of the rest was history. And we've got articles saying the team that we're working with, working with a witch, literally. The article was very favourable, but very English in terms of what's all this stuff about. And it's just grown out of the headline story, and where the winning edge 3% comes from is, it's a true story. You can find it on the web. The horse called Ahmed, that some statistician was, working out the times, and that year Ahmed won sort of $15 million, which is a lot of money back in the day. Not bad today, but certainly was then. And there's some other horse that nobody knows the name of course, and it ran in an awful lot of the races that Ahmed ran in. And they worked out the time difference, because Ahmad, got $15 million in winnings. This other horse got less than $750,000. So it was a huge difference. So you'd think there'd be a huge difference in speed, but as per the title, he was actually 3% faster, and it became our little headline for the footballers and the people that we work with, that if you could open their minds to, you haven't got to be 50% better. You've got to be 1% better, 0.5% better in several things. And just knowing this gives you an edge, and then we could start giving them techniques and different things to work on. But we got such good results with some small teams that were always the lowest budget in the league. And why does a team that couldn't get into the main leagues get promoted after 108 years? Nothing changed other than the kind of the culture. And I think the difference that we got into is the psychology stuff is often seen as techniques, and we found that if we taught techniques, and I'm not really the technique guy, I'm the behavioral guy. I like culture and where things fit together. And my project manager, a fellow called Lou, said to me years ago, well, Mark, it doesn't matter whether you're working with football teams, banks, grocery, network marketing, a whole range of different things. This is him talking. I will always look at the environment that the results are produced in. And the more we focused on that, the more the players, in the football sense, started to use the techniques. So we saw that the key was what became known as the Win-vironment, which I didn't really like as a title, but the football kind of, they got it. Win-environment, they kind of got it and put it together. So the more you focus on, and you're back to the GV stuff, that the more you focus on the environment with which the results are produced or expected to produce in, doesn't matter the industries from football to investment banks, the results were the same. And in the investment bank example, we asked this recruiter guy, and they recruit Oxford, Cambridge, first class honours. But we said to him, and they $2 million they were spent on this development program. It was a long time ago. He said, well, what's the difference between the successful people and the ones that aren't success? And he said the word attitude. And I said, but you've just put 2 million quid into technical training. How much have you put into attitude development? And he looked, when somebody looks at you, and we didn't get the business, by the way, because I think I took him a bit too far to his pain point. And he said, nothing. And I said, but you've just told me. So you just made a 2 million investment in something that you've just said isn't critical, and you're investing nothing in the critical factor. We saw that before we started working in sport, the implications for a group of footballers, 30 of them or whatever it is, and the staff, saying that the psychological aspects, the mentality stuff, is more important than the physical stuff. But they do 10 or 15 hours physical training and very patchy at best psychological training. There might be a winning edge if you wake up to that. And it came from there, and worked in some funny places like Latvia and had wonderful times, and the results have been uniformly very good. So there must be something right about it.
So one of the sort of prominent psychologists that's in sport is Stephen Peters with the chimp mind, and and Dave Brailsford, who I'm a big fan of and read lots about him and really admire him as he's tough as hell, but they talk about the environment and the development, the psychology, which is incredibly important. Where do you see Stephen Peters in that, fitting into that environment? And are you an admirer, or is there a?
I like the content of the chimp stuff. I like the content, but it's kind of what became one of the great stories, because I'm not sure it would ever happen again. But a club we worked with, they inherited a chimp paradox person. But it's sort of somebody trained by them, and not sure that necessarily works, but the content was good. And the manager also had kind of a shrink sounding board that he used to bounce things off just for himself. But I'd known him since he was a very young player way back in the day. And long story, but the headline of which is they were really struggling, and he was really panicking about relegation. So I ended up as number 3 going in. But I was kind of proud in a way, because why did he reach for me when they really hit the wall, as it were?
Yeah.
And we got the club safe very quickly. We got 13 points out of 15 on a very limited time to turn this around. So again, it worked. Well, what we learned in that situation, because chimp paradox was the players knew it, it's kind of good material for a motivated individual player to sort of use for themselves. They get to understand that little voice that most people report that they have. But we didn't find it helped bringing them together as a team. And that's where I realized that together each achieves more optimal stuff was kind of, I do one-to-one stuff, excuse me, but I primarily like the group dynamic stuff and maybe my old psychology background. And that was the difference, because we did a lot of work about buying into the task at hand, and everybody had a role. And it's kind of there in the chimp paradox stuff, but we see that as a much more individual psychological development program, whereas we come at it from, we're all in this together, like a mini war campaign to turn it around, and the results stood for themselves.
Amazing. Thank you very much for sharing that. So let's move into your master biz connector and as a business strategist. So one of the things you talk about is the quality of life and collaboration, which you call collaboration. So why don't you tell me about that aspect of work that you do? You're mute.
How'd that happen? Since the first generation of coaches that we recruited and trained in the early 90s, we noticed a phenomena, which was they weren't from sales and marketing backgrounds. And in those days, nobody really knew what a coach was in that sense. I mean, we did get on the phone, are you a bus company? Hello, I'm a coach. I mean, they didn't know what it was. And I don't know which is harder, when nobody knows what you are, or in a very overpopulated market like you've got today, where there's coaches everywhere. And there's, difficulties in both, I guess, and benefits in both. But once we noticed that, and because a few of us at that organization were from sales and sort of marketing backgrounds, we had a system that encouraged us to team up, where I would go and do the selling side of it, if you like. And then, because what the coaches want to do was coach, they wanted to deliver the programs, and consultants as well that we had. Well, if you age that story from the early 90s to now, we have almost a global phenomena that everybody's been told certainly in what's called the first world countries, the Western economies, to go and get 47 qualifications. Well, everybody's got qualifications, but they all kind of missed the memo, it would appear, about, well, if you're going to go into business, you're going to have to know about selling. And I don't want to sell. I don't like selling. Well, okay, you don't have to do it, but you're going to have to find a way for your business to have a 24/7 sales capacity or business development capacity. And all these things were putting us on a path to really helping non-sales and marketing background business owners to install a 24/7 business development capability. It's the E-Myth bit again, that they were good at cutting the hair, they were good at making the cakes, they were good at designing software, but they weren't from a business background, or they certainly didn't like the salesy stuff. So all of these projects where we were hiring commission-only salespeople, or just creative ways to help businesses grow that they hadn't got to do themselves, led to this new profession that we grandiosely call business connectors. And our brand is Biz Connect with the Q, which you mentioned. So it just grew out of this. If you haven't got a 24/7 business development capability today, you're falling behind. And when we do our little diagnostics with clients, you can guarantee that 85% of them will come in with the first one has scored as a 5, which is a priority, which means they need leads. So in the past, we'd go and get leads, but then they couldn't convert them because they didn't have a sales mechanism. So we just saw this perpetual need. And then the networking kind of industry was exploding, and everybody was going to these networking sessions. But again, the people that we spoke to, they'd rather not be there. They're not trained to network. And if they were business owners, it wasn't connected to a strategy in their business. If I said to them, well, why do you come to this call, or why are you a member of this networking group? Most people would say, I don't know what else to do. I've got to find something to get leads from. So, well, do you get 4 leads, of which you convert, one this month and another one next month? So, could you give me a return on investment model for attending? And the answer typically was no. And in a nice way, we used to call it business babies, because there were people that were very passionate, very committed, but they just didn't have a business mindset. You asked right up front. They just didn't have that. It didn't make them bad people and it didn't make them stupid, but they were often a bit daft in terms of spending all this time on behaviors or tactics that weren't working. And that's where we started to get into. If we can position this new profession as biz connectors, then any business that wants one can get access to a 24/7, money sales, but business development capability.
So you do a diagnostic on the company before you go into them. Essentially, you're saying that most of these companies don't have the right sales techniques or tactics in their business. They haven't got the right person doing it, or maybe they haven't got anyone doing it. So you go there and you teach them how to do sales, or do you help them, enable them with other sales teams, outsourced sales teams?
The headline would be both or all of the above, in that the headline is definitely, particularly if you're starting in that we call them ambizos, ambitious business owners, that they're solopreneurs, but they're not doing it for lifestyle money. They're doing it to grow a business. So they'll talk a brand language. They know they've got to get into raising capital and hiring people. Well, if they're a passionate designer, all that stuff that they know they've got to do, they have no experience in it. So we'll help them map that bit out, because if you can get them across that first hump to really being able to produce income beyond them, and they are not the product, that the product becomes a process in the business, then we could really get into scaling up their business. So we would look at, it used to be, I can remember a client not that many years ago, and he said to me, I didn't think there were any commission-only salespeople anymore. And I said to him, well, I'm not sure they're called that anymore, but I can show you sales guys that grew up in the kind of the financial services industry. And the famous line was when the companies offered them a salary, they said, you're not cutting our money in half, because they knew how to make good money from the performance principle they've been taught. Well, we've lost a lot of that. So we were just bringing that back in forms that clients could respond to, and then designing their business in terms of where there were niches that were successful, or, a lot of them had got a good email list, but were doing nothing with it. They weren't building any relationships. So we would look to put a lot of structure to get quick wins in, to get growth, because then from the diagnostic, we started doing things like finding grants that people didn't know that they qualified for. And if they'd find, 20 grand in it, they didn't mind investing with us. And we already had a value with them, because the reason for doing that was just showing them that there was things that they didn't know about that were to their benefit. If it was profits and cash that they didn't know about, it gave them some growth space and it gave them some ways to move forward. So it's kind of reinventing what we used to call sales on that basis, Mark. It's a completely different approach to any business that wants one, whether it's us training their people or typically bringing in new resources, outsourcing the old business development capability in a way that the key people who run it can manage it. Because some of the clients where we run effectively what we call a top liner, which is just a specialist biz connector, because they don't want to suddenly, sales manage 5 or 6 people. They didn't like it the last time they tried. So if we help them profile the person, and they're kind of a commission-only salesperson, but they're very attached to the brand and they're managed by us, it gives kind of I'm doing it as a triangle, but a bit of a virtuous circle where everybody's in the right position. The guy who runs the business is able to do the delivery and the things that they like. The top liner can represent them, and we can support both of them. That's a winning formula that gets rid of and starts to offset this hideous 80+% business failure rate that us and UK and the States have both got inside 5 years. Yeah. For all these tools, for all these super duper things that we've got a 4 out of 5. It's originally an E-Myth statistic. Yeah. 96% of them are gone in 10 years. That says there is a fault hardwired into the way we design businesses. In our humble opinion, it's this sales front end piece that is not working properly. We look to solve that.
And you support that team as well. So if you brought in a few people to help with business development sales, you actually manage the salespeople because you've got the experience and the knowledge, and they outsource that aspect of their business. And let's just say on the E-Myth, you have a practitioner who's a baker, and then you have someone in the store who sells, and then you've got the entrepreneur. Are you then sort of playing in that role as the entrepreneur, sort of building the success of the sales team that they can buy another shop or do it online or generate leads and sales that way? Is that what you're supporting?
Yeah. I mean, obviously we have to agree that with the different business owners. They've got different things that they want, but in the nicest possible way, as we get to know them, if they knew all the right answers, they probably wouldn't need us. And if tennis, going back to the football example or sports example, if Andy Murray has backhand coaches, forehand coaches, they have experts that can give them little distinctions. Well, why wouldn't business owners do the same thing? They've been taught to be this jack of all trades that just ends up, in the feedback we get, spending 80% of their time on stuff they don't like, rather than investing 80% of their time in the stuff that they're good at, which then lets the rest of the business grow. So we cross that bridge.
Who is your ideal client? You're on mute. You're on mute, Mark.
Keep clicking in and out. The ideal client for us is what we call those ambizos, those ambitious business owners. And it's that, we've got services, and some of our business connectors will help lifestyle businesses because some of them are very successful and very good. But it's our sweet spot. There's a book, isn't there? The Blue Ocean book. It's quite graphic, as in the red ocean is where the blood is. I don't know where that comes from, but the blue ocean is kind of the clear markets. And nobody is serving that particular market. There's lots of people trying to sell strategic alliances and to the kind of solopreneur. And there's lots of people trying to sell to what we call SMEs, that middle range sort of family type businesses. But between the two of them, above the lifestyle bit, or above in aspiration, is this ambizo, this scale up opportunity. That's our sweet spot, because if we can get them to the next level of cash flow, then we can start designing capital strategy. And, we've got experience and people around us who've taken companies public, but you've got to have the right foundations in place in order to do that. That's our sweet spot.
What inspires you?
Inspires me. Well, I think my single thing is, there's a word for it. There's a word that is entelechy, and Entelechy, and it comes from, if I'm holding an oak seed, the entelechy, because entelechy means turning potential or the actuality or into the reality of not just growing one oak tree, but spawning an oak forest that lasts for 1,000 years, and birds live in it and vegetation grows around it. People, build houses with it. So it's entelechy is kind of my word, or it's a biological word. And that people, the biggest lost resource in the world today is underachieved potential. Because if we've got all of these tools and we've got all of this, if look at the ability for you and I to talk like this, we've got all of these tools, but the human equation, the human operator hasn't changed. So that's what inspires me. People that can push on to really, from difficult backgrounds in some cases, or other people that help people do that, or anything that is helping the human being fulfill their potential, because we're capable of so much more.
Absolutely. So what's the plan for the next 2 to 5 years? Where do you see you personally or your business growing to?
For me, it's very simple, really. The Biz Connect and the Biz Connectors of the profession, the more we build that, because if we've got super duper talent like Howard Berg, as we call him, our poster boy, even he's 71, but he's the world's fastest reader. Well, if he can get people, and it's not about reading faster, really, it's learning faster, isn't it? But that's sort of implied in what he does. If the Biz Connectors can create distribution for all the businesses in the world to be big picture about it, and get resources like a Howard Berg, or we know well the ex-Tesco's, our biggest food retailer based in the States now, if he was the Tesco's CMO. well, not many small businesses can get access to someone like him. Well, they can through us. So we've got those experts, but the distribution, both for the smaller businesses to be able to grow, but also to get access to these resources that they didn't think were available to them. So there's lots of clever brandings and lots of stuff about Quallywood community and all this sexy tweet stuff. But at the end of the day, the only thing I really want is this new profession of biz connectors to be out there. Because if you go back a while, there was this person called the blacksmith who used to take your teeth out, and they got the job done, but it wasn't the most pleasant, I wonder if we had a specialist role. Well, it's almost the same for me as the biz connectors are the dentists in that scenario, because they are professional people who wake up in the morning looking to talk to people, not to bake cakes, not to, the technical people will do all that. So the world needs those deal makers, those biz connectors, as we call them. So I want to create that as my give back to the world that also creates a distribution that gets more deals done. And that's how economies grow. So that's my big picture.
Amazing. Well, good luck with that. Look, we're coming to the end of the interview. I asked the same 6 questions to all of my guests. They're quick fire questions. They don't need a quick fire answer. They've been described as a bit thought provoking. So let's see how we get on with these. First one is, what's the best decision that you've made?
Well, it's got to be marrying my wife, I think. Is that the official answer?
Especially if she's listening.
Joking aside, she's been involved. She doesn't like being number one, but she is an example of people that we know in business that they don't have a partner, be it a partner or a life partner. And there's just something very powerful about being able to bounce things off and decisions from somebody in that capacity. And for those reasons and many, many more, the relationshiping, invest in relationships as the core to everything we believe in about business, then that's got to be the winner. That's
amazing. What's the best piece of advice you've been given?
Best piece of advice. Well, as we mentioned in before, it may not be the best because there's quite a few of them, but one that comes to mind is a Zig Ziglar line when a buddy of mine queued up to speak to him at an event in Florida, and they were signing books and things, and he eventually got to the queue, and he asked Ziglar, what's the best piece of advice you could give me? And Ziglar looked behind him at all these other people in this queue, and very laconically in that, laid back Southern US style. And he just said, I'll do it because we could do it as fun, can't we? Kind of, son, when you see a queue, because there's a big, they call it a line, don't they? When you see a line, run like hell in the opposite direction. As in, it's already gone. It's already gone. But we have these things called I can't not remembers. And, everybody's got these little instincty things that there's a Rupert Murdoch line. It's not his line, but somebody said about him, he was at his desk every morning, 6 o'clock doing deals. Well, I mightn't be there at 6 o'clock unless I've worked all the way through the night because I'm a night owl, not an early starter. Okay. But I got the principle, and it's doing that deals and finding what you're good at. It's really finding what you're good at, and you opened up with it as long as you've got the commercial business mindset to make it work, whether it's you or who you team up with.
Someone I interviewed, it was a couple that I interviewed, and she talked about the bliss zone, which I really liked, which was a part of your life which you're passionate about and makes you money. Because you can be passionate about something, I don't know, nothing about bakers, but you can be passionate about cakes and you love making cakes, but there's not really a long-term business growth. But if you can find something that you're hugely passionate about and it makes some good money with it as well, that sort of beautiful bliss zone is where you should be targeting. I think it's a really important point. Yes, you should follow your passions, but you still have to pay the bills.
Absolutely.
You still have to pay the bills. So you do need to think about that as well. So that's one of my favorite comments. Okay, next one. Who's the person that you've helped? Who's the person that's helped you most in your career?
Most in my career. I don't think there's one person, Mark, really. I think there's a group of, like, a daft situation to do with Cyprus property from years ago, and the details don't matter, but it's a legal problem, and it's having people like the person I'm thinking about, who he's a landlord, he's just a very experienced business guy, and the ability to pick up the phone, and because we've known each other a long time, he quickly goes into helping me with this particular problem. And I think it's not a who, it's a group of people that I know they could call me at 3 o'clock in the morning because I could call them at 3 o'clock in the morning. And it's the investment in some key relationships and realizing that with that, you can probably solve any business problem, and you can probably get a lot closer towards that entelechy, that potential. So I don't think it's one person, but there's probably a group of 4 or 5 absolutely top level people that I can call them, they can call me, that we could solve any problem.
Amazing. Do you have any regrets?
Yeah, kind of. When we had a hotel about 30 miles from here, and we turned it into a training center. And I'm a bit of a one for, I'm the ideas man, really. I'm not the integrator as per Traction. I'm the ideas man. And I think because it's a big old building, you can end up as the buildings manager, so you get pulled away from the bits that you're good at. In this case, I'm good at. So I suppose the opportunity, whilst the market moved away from, we bought that so that we could physically get groups together, and the market was going more digital. But at the same token, if we still had that building and that was the home of Quallywood, it would still have a role. So that might be I would like to have given that an extra push in the bigger plan.
Oh, thank you for your honesty. And I think you're right. Like, there's a massive, especially through COVID, we had a massive demand of digital courses and online courses. But I'm definitely finding networking and training and courses and things like that, the face-to-face stuff is still super valuable. It actually gives you an extra, whatever that percentage is, 10-20% that you don't get online. Online's good.
You're just winding me up again, aren't you?
No, I'm not. I'm sorry to bring up bad memories, I'm finding that now, especially with networking, the value of networking face-to-face is just so much more powerful than being in Zoom. Zoom's great and we love it and it's really helped, but like networking, you can get so much more powerful when you're doing face-to-face as well.
There's something about breaking bread together, isn't there? The cup of cut, there just says something about it.
Yeah,
I know. That's why I want me building.
Right. Do it again. Get another place.
Well, who knows? I may have plans.
Okay, super. What are you most proud of?
Kind of, I don't know. I always said to our son, who's coming up 20, I'd never be the other generation complaining about the younger generation, but there are obviously differences, and the headline is the phone and all of that they've grown up with. And I don't want to take credit for, I'm just his dad on that basis, but in a way it's either him in the sense of being a young guy, and my wife did the bulk of the work, but we home educated him.
Oh, wow.
Until he got to about 16, 17, he did A-levels and the uni and that kind of stuff. And, these things called girls became interested in that age. So we thought, right, but we wanted to sort of protect his mind when he was younger. And Ellen, my wife, she's not from a teaching background. A lot of the other mothers were from teaching backgrounds, amazingly, really, as home ed sort of parents. So I think that's right up there from him just being a rounded sort of person that makes a big impact everywhere he goes. So I'll probably take that on a personal level. And then there's a few football examples in there. I like achieving things where people said it couldn't be done. There's a few in there as well, but I think it's Cody is the headline.
Amazing. What does legacy mean to you?
Legacy is well, I'm in kind of the way I'll leave my legacy is to help people like Howard Berg leave his, because we know a lot of people who are brilliant at what they do, and their number one challenge and aspiration for their legacy and their destiny is to get that material to a bigger audience. So that's my job as the biz connector, is to help people who've got powerful messages, and often, they're not the greatest marketers necessarily. They're teachers primarily, in that sense, new generation teachers. So that's, I think, legacy for me is creating that IntelliKey broadcast system, helping people. If you can double and treble your reading speed and sort of the same of your learning retention, Howard's line would be, nobody's complaining that the world is full of smart people. Well, they are smart, but they may not being educated in a way that frees them up. Ultimately, I'm in the education distribution business. So the biz connectors can charge up and tell people about it. And when they want to connect with the people that we know, then that's my legacy, that distribution system.
Amazing. Lastly, where can people find you if they want to reach out to you?
They can either find me at Quallywood on LinkedIn, the LinkedIn Quali, it'll get me at Quallywood if they do it after the linkedin.com/in. And then the website that was literally being branded as we speak, or rebranded, at BIZQONNECT, bizconnect.com.
And Quallywood is Q instead of a H, and Hollywood.
Quallywood, they'll start to see more physical. They'll start to see the flag and some sexy things about Quallywood very shortly. But BizConnect is the business entity within it.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Mark. It's been absolutely fascinating. The variety of different things, business and sport, which are obviously connected, and using psychology as part of that is an amazing, valuable tool. So I've been absolutely absorbed by your conversation. So thank you very much for today.
Pleasure.
And hopefully speak to you soon. Thank you.
I look forward to it.
Cheers.